The sky was still bruised with early morning pink when I zipped my bag closed. Patrick was by the window, mug in hand, already in his weekend rhythm, quiet, calm, maybe even content. I leaned in, kissed his cheek, and he didn't ask too many questions, which is something I used to love about him. I told him Emily and Mark missed me, that she wanted some help with a nursery room remodel, that I'd only be gone a few days. He offered to drive me twice. I laughed it off both times. It's just the lake, I said. I'll be back before you even notice I'm gone. But I already knew I'd be staying longer. And not because of Emily, not because of some silly nursery. There's a moment when you lie to someone you love and expect to feel the sting, but it doesn't come. It's like stepping into a cold lake and realizing your skin doesn't flinch. You've gone numb. That's how I knew something in me had already changed. If you've ever held a secret in your chest that you couldn't name yet, just a pressure you couldn't breathe past, you know the kind of drive I took that morning. My hands gripped the steering wheel like I was anchoring myself to reality. But reality kept slipping. I wasn't just driving to Emily's, I was driving towards something I hadn't admitted out loud, not even to myself. And whatever it was, it had claws. By the way, if you're listening and the story pulls you in even a little, consider subscribing and hitting like. 97% of people just listen without doing either, and it honestly means the world to our team. So thank you. Now, back to the drive. I took the long road around the lake, the one with fewer turns and more space to think. I played a playlist from when Emily was still in high school. We used to sing those songs together on late-night grocery runs, back when her laugh didn't sound rehearsed, back before she met Mark. I'd been to their place a few times since they moved to that cul-de-sac. It was always picture-perfect from the outside, trimmed hedges matching patio chairs, but lately Emily had sounded different on the phone, softer, too soft, and always rushed, always listening for something in the background. When she invited me, she didn't ask directly. She said, "It'd be nice to have you here," like she was offering a seat in a storm shelter, not brunch by the lake. That's why I packed more than I needed. Not just clothes, documents, my second phone, a folder I never told Patrick about. I wasn't sure what I'd find, but I wanted to be ready. And then, 2 weeks in, everything cracked open. But not because of me, not because of Emily. It was Parikh. He showed up unannounced, smiling like a man carrying good news in a bottle of wine. I watched him from the upstairs window as he parked, unaware. That's when the neighbor ran out, waving her arms like a warning flare, and I remember thinking, it's too late to stop the fire. The bottle of red clinked gently in the passenger seat as I watched the highway peel open in front of me. The trees were in full autumn fire, gold, rust, crimson, arching over the road like a blessing. I remember thinking, this'll make her smile. Nora loved this route, said it smelled like October and tasted like time travel. She hadn't texted since Tuesday, Emily either. I figured maybe they were caught up in mother-daughter talks, wine nights, those long conversations that loop around for hours and solve nothing but still feel sacred, but something about the quiet felt staged, like background music turned down too low. Still, I didn't want to be that guy, the overprotective husband, the father who barges in, so I made it light. I'd show up, knock, make them laugh, hand over the wine like it was some royal delivery, maybe even grill out on the back deck. I pictured Emily, barefoot, on the porch swing, Nora with a mug of tea, the two of them smiling as I rounded the path. It was almost too perfect, and that should have been my first red flag. I pulled off the main road and coasted into the familiar curves of their neighborhood. Everything looked the same, the trimmed lawns, the tidy mailboxes, the wind chimes barely moving. But then I turned the last corner, and all that golden warmth bled away. There was a police car in the driveway, then a second one, parked crooked on the curb, and then I saw her. Janine, their neighbor, sprinting toward me like something had snapped inside her, hair wild, shoes half on, yelling my name like it was a siren. "Patrick, wait, you can't go in, you can't." I barely had time to shift into park before she was at my window, banging on the glass, breathless, eyes wide. "I called them," she gasped. "I heard screaming, something's wrong. You can't go in there. Don't go in there." And then I heard it too. One sharp, shattering scream cutting across the quiet from the direction of the backyard. Female, not just startled. Panic. I didn't remember opening the car door. I just knew the wine bottle had rolled onto the pavement, and Janine was still holding my sleeve, voice trembling. "They've been fighting all week. I tried to ignore it, but just now, I heard something break. I took 3 steps toward the house before the officer shouted at me to stop, and I did, because something in me already knew this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a reckoning. The moment I saw him step from the car, I knew the clock had run out. Patrick always walked with a kind of quiet authority, even when he wasn't trying to, the kind of man who could make strangers feel safe just by existing in the room. But that confidence froze in real time as Janine gripped his sleeve like a lifeline. I watched it from the hallway, just past the foyer, behind a curtain. I hadn't planned for this. His sudden arrival, the siren still blocks away, Emily still locked in the bathroom upstairs, her hands shaking too hard to dial. And Mark pacing the kitchen like a wolf with a limp. The moment the neighbor ran toward Patrick, everything that had been tightly compressed over the last 2 weeks blew open. I felt it in my teeth. Mark had been yelling before, but after that scream, Emily's, his voice went low, quieter. That's when I knew he was planning something, and that terrified me more than anything. Patrick stepped forward again, wine bottle already forgotten at his feet. I could see him squinting at the house like he was trying to match what he saw with the image he'd carried in his head on the drive. Nothing lined up. The blinds crooked, the screen door bent outward, my coat on the ground like it had been torn off. Then Janine said it, loud enough for me to hear even from inside, "You need to see for yourself." And Mark heard that too. He turned slowly toward me from the kitchen, one hand still clenched around the edge of the counter. His face wasn't angry. It was flat, like the moment before a glass slips from a table and no one tries to catch it. Just the acceptance of breakage. "You called someone," he muttered. "No, you called him." I didn't know he was coming, but he was already moving toward the hallway, toward me, and that's when the front door burst open. 2 officers stepped in like floodwater, guns holstered but presence massive. One spotted me, the other pushed through toward the backyard. Mark didn't fight, he didn't run, he didn't raise his voice. He just stood there, breathing heavily, like the world had finally admitted what he always suspected, that it was stacked against him. I pointed. "Emily's upstairs, bathroom. She won't unlock it unless it's me." The officer nodded and took the stairs 2 at a time. The scream Patrick had heard, it wasn't Emily. It was me, not from pain, from release, because I had waited for this moment, risked everything for it, planted the evidence, gathered the recordings. And now the door was open, and the light was pouring in. Patrick stood just beyond the threshold, one officer's hand braced flat against his chest. It wasn't forceful. It didn't need to be. Patrick wasn't moving, not because of the hand, because of what he was seeing, what he couldn't unsee. Mark stood in the middle of the living room, shirt clinging to one shoulder, torn halfway down the side. Not from a fight, from the moment I yanked Emily away from him an hour earlier. The collar had snapped like tissue. His wrists now bore the fresh grooves of metal, cuffed, pulled tight, hands behind his back, his mouth a smirk caught mid-death. He didn't speak. Not to me, not to the officers, just watched. Emily's sobs echoed faintly from upstairs, raw, irregular, like her body didn't remember how to cry. One of the officers had carried her out of the bathroom after unlocking the door with a credit card. She'd been sitting on the floor in a robe, door braced with a mop handle, clutching her phone to her chest like a talisman she couldn't make work. I was near the fireplace, still trembling, but standing. That mattered to me, standing. One of the officers turned to Patrick, who looked like someone had just drained the air from his lungs and left his skin behind. His eyes bounced between me, Mark, the shattered coffee table, the knife, my knife, still sheathed and untouched on the floor by the stairwell. He looked for logic, pattern, a thread. There wasn't one. "Sir," the officer said, slow, careful, like every word was a match he was about to strike. "It's domestic, but it's deeper than that." Patrick blinked once. "She told me she was here to help with the nursery." "I was," I whispered. "I am." Mark let out a bitter breath through his nose. Not quite a laugh, not quite anything, just a sound, like a crack forming. "Ma'am," the younger officer asked me, clipboard in hand, "can you confirm your relationship to both parties?" "I'm her mother," I said, pointing upstairs, "and I'm not his anything." The officer nodded, made a note. Patrick took a single step forward. The officer didn't stop him this time. His voice was hoarse. What happened here? I didn't look at Mark. I couldn't. I looked at Patrick, the man I'd built my life with. And for the first time, I told him something I had carried like glass in my chest for months. She was trying to leave him, but he made sure she had nowhere to go. Patrick's face twitched, just once, barely visible. But it was there. That moment when understanding creeps in through the cracks and rearranges your entire foundation. She didn't tell us, he said. Why didn't she tell us? She didn't think we'd believe her. Mark was being let out by then, head down, but not low enough. He looked up just as Patrick turned. Their eyes met, and for the first time in years, I saw my husband's hands shake. Not from rage, not from fear, from the weight of hindsight. He'd driven 2 hours with a bottle of wine, expecting a smile, and instead, he'd arrived at a battlefield already in ruins. The house smelled like broken things, splintered wood, spilled candle wax, a scorched pot holder still clinging to the edge of the stove where Mark had thrown it 3 nights ago. It felt like the aftermath of a storm, except the damage wasn't measured in wind or water. It was measured in silence, in how much was never said and how long it was allowed to grow. Emily sat curled on the edge of the guest bed, her voice brittle, talking in fragments like each sentence cost her breath. The officer recording her statement was patient, quiet. She'd speak, then stop, rewind, correct herself, then freeze again. He didn't hit me at first, she said. Just rules, small ones. Don't leave dishes in the sink. Don't answer calls during dinner. Don't wear that dress. Don't go out without telling him. Then it became, don't see my friends. Don't talk to you. Don't talk to anyone. She stared at the officer's badge for a long time before whispering. Then it was, don't breathe unless I say so. Her voice cracked there, but not from the words, from the memory. I hadn't meant to see the bruises the first time. She bent to pick something up, and her sweater slid. A yellow bloom, high on her ribs. I said nothing. Neither did she. That was 2 visits ago. I told myself I must have been mistaken, that she would say something if it were real. I told myself what every other neighbor must have told themselves when they heard the muffled arguments through the drywall. It's not my business. They'll work it out. Until one night, it wasn't bruises anymore. It was a cut. Shallow, yes, but in a place that said more than any words ever could. So I stayed longer, started watching. Mark noticed. That's why it got worse before it got better. He felt the control slipping. And when men like that lose their grip, they don't loosen. They crush. Outside, Patrick sat on the porch, hunched over, elbows on his knees, staring at the lawn like it held some kind of answer. He hadn't spoken since the officer told him about the locked bathroom, about Emily's panic attack, about the knife that wasn't drawn but had been placed strategically within reach. He didn't look up when I stepped outside, just said, she said she was happy. I sat beside him and pulled the blanket tighter around my shoulders. She lied, I said, to survive. He blinked slowly. And you knew? I suspected. I couldn't prove it. He finally looked at me. Really looked. Not with accusation, not with anger, just devastation. And today, I gave him a choice, leave or I call the police. He laughed. That's when I knew he'd never stop. We sat there for a long time, the kind of silence that's not empty but filled with every word we should have said years ago. Then from inside came Emily's voice, barely audible, but clear. She saved me. Patrick's hands went still, not clenched, not trembling, just still, like a man who'd been walking through fog for years and had finally reached the cliff's edge. I couldn't let it continue, I said. And that was the only truth left between us that didn't need explanation. Emily and I sat in the quiet after the statements were over, the officers gone, the neighbors retreating to their homes with guilty glances and soft apologies that came too late. The only sounds were the ticking of the old wall clock and the soft crinkle of tissue in her hand. Her hair was pulled back, exposing a bruise beneath her ear she hadn't even tried to conceal. Not this time. I didn't press her. I just waited. When she finally spoke, it came not as a confession but as a reckoning. I didn't think you'd believe me, she said, eyes fixed on the edge of the coffee table where the varnish had worn thin. Not because of you, because of me. I frowned. You? She nodded. I used to tell myself I was strong, that I'd never be the kind of woman who let a man control her. So when it started, I kept thinking, this can't be what it looks like. This isn't happening to me. He's just stressed. I'm overreacting. He made you doubt what you knew, I said softly. She laughed once, bitter. He didn't have to. I did it for him. She explained how it began. Little things. The dinner parties with her friends that he canceled at the last minute, the way he'd roll his eyes when she laughed at my jokes. The constant corrections framed as concern. Don't say that, you sound silly. Don't wear that. It's not flattering. Why would you talk about our business to your mom? At first, she argued back, but then the arguments became evidence of how ungrateful she was, how emotional, how unstable, and then the gaslighting. The hours she'd spend questioning her own memory. Did he really say that? Did she really overreact? Maybe it was her fault. Maybe she just didn't understand how relationships work. When he took my phone for a week, she said, he said it was because I needed a break. But really, he just didn't want me texting anyone. He read everything before giving it back. I didn't even notice how quiet my life had become. I felt that in my throat, a slow, crawling guilt, because I had noticed, but only in the way a person notices a draft in a room, subtle, ignorable, a chill you tell yourself is nothing. I started to see it clearer during my visit in July, I admitted. The way he touched you like he was adjusting something, not loving someone. The way you asked for permission before speaking sometimes. Emily's eyes welled again, but she didn't cry. Not this time. Just nodded. Slow. I didn't tell you to stay longer, she said, but I'm glad you did. I needed proof, I said. Something undeniable. He was too careful when I was around. Until today. Emily closed her eyes. Today, he told me to get rid of you. I froze. He said you were poisoning me, that I was becoming difficult again, that you didn't respect boundaries, and if I didn't get you out, he would. She said the words like she was reporting a weather pattern, not a threat. That's when I made my decision. I told her to go upstairs and lock the door, that I'd handle it. I planted the recorder under the edge of the kitchen table. Let him come to me. Let him say the things he'd been hiding. And he did. His mask didn't just slip, it shattered. The officers told me later that the audio was sufficiently incriminating. But I wasn't listening for them. I was listening for her. For the moment my daughter would finally stop asking permission to exist. That moment came today, not because she was ready, but because she was cornered. And when you back a woman into silence long enough, the first word she speaks becomes a blade. We drove home in near silence, not out of avoidance. There simply wasn't anything left that needed to be said aloud. Patrick kept one hand on the wheel, the other resting near the gear shift like always, but he didn't reach for the radio, didn't ask if I was hungry, didn't try to fill the space between us. I think he understood that I wasn't coming back to the same house I'd left. I was coming back changed, with pieces of someone else's war still stuck under my nails. The house looked smaller somehow, dimmer. Maybe it was the clouds, maybe it was me. I walked in first, dropped my overnight bag by the stairs, and paused. Not because I was overwhelmed, because I didn't feel anything. I had shed something back there, on that porch, in that bathroom, in the sound of my daughter's first clean breath. I unpacked the essentials in silence. The rest I left folded. There was a stillness in the kitchen that didn't ask questions. I didn't rush to make dinner. Patrick didn't hover. We moved around each other like two people carrying fragile things they didn't want to drop. That night, I sat on the edge of the bed, brushing my hair longer than necessary, staring at the folds in the comforter. I heard him move downstairs, opening drawers, then nothing. I didn't join him. I didn't ask him to come up. I just needed space to recalibrate the map of my life. Emily had moved in with a friend we trusted, someone who made space for her without condition. She took only a suitcase and her favorite blanket. Everything else she left behind. The landlord told us Mark wouldn't be returning. Bail denied. The charges weren't just noise disturbance or domestic. The recordings, the ones I left on the officer's flash drive, had revealed something far deeper, systemic and cruel. I didn't watch the news. I didn't read the court summaries. I didn't care about the outcome in the legal sense. The victory had already happened. Emily was breathing again, laughing sometimes, softly, carefully, like a person learning to walk on new legs. The next morning, I brewed coffee before Patrick even came downstairs. I placed a folded piece of paper on his desk, the corner tucked under his favorite pen. Then I left the room without a word. When he finally read it, he didn't call out. He didn't follow me. Hours passed. Sunlight shifted across the kitchen floor like a sundial. Eventually, I heard the quiet creak of his chair as he stood. His footsteps crossed the house, then paused behind me. He didn't ask what it meant. He just placed a hand gently on my shoulder, not to steer, not to claim, just to say, "I see you." And for the first time in months, I felt that maybe, just maybe, he did. We started with the walls. Emily said she wanted them white, not because she liked the color, but because she needed to see things clean. No shadows, no stain of what used to be. We spent an entire Saturday brushing coats of soft matte white over every surface in her new place. Me, Patrick, and Emily in a quiet rhythm. No music, no conversation, just the sound of brushes scraping gently, rollers gliding, and paint cans opening like small beginnings. She'd rented a small walk-up near the river. 2 rooms, a narrow kitchen, cracked tile in the bathroom. But there was light, honest, unfiltered light that poured through the east-facing window every morning. She said that mattered. She said she wanted to wake up without guessing what time it was. Patrick patched the holes left by the old tenant. I watched him move, carefully, deliberately, as if each repair was a word he couldn't find in speech. I'd never seen him so quiet around Emily before. Not distant, not hesitant, just quiet, in the way a man becomes when he realizes listening is the only language that matters. We brought groceries, replaced her locks, helped her hang a single-frame photo, a beach trip from 10 years ago, before everything got complicated. She didn't want to talk about what came after. I didn't push her. The neighbors, old, kind women with too many cats and stories that spun off into the weeds, brought casseroles and lentils and tea cakes. One of them offered to walk with Emily in the mornings. She declined, gently, said she preferred the quiet for now. Back home, I found myself rising earlier again. I'd stopped for a while back when I was still visiting Emily and couldn't sleep without the dread creeping in. Now, with the sun breaking over the trees, I'd pull on a sweater and step outside with Patrick. We didn't say much, just walked, sometimes hand in hand, sometimes with our arms brushing, like we were reacquainting ourselves with the geography of one another. There was a day, about 2 weeks in, when Emily called just to ask what brand of olive oil I liked best, not for a recipe, just to chat. I had to set the phone down afterward and breathe slowly for a full minute. That's how fragile healing is at first. It sneaks up on you. Patrick built her a bookshelf. She filled it with old poetry, a stack of used journals, and a single photo album that only held 3 pictures. For now. When she thanked him, he only smiled, wiped his hands, and told her to let it dry overnight. And that night, back in our kitchen, I caught him watching me as I stirred a pot of soup. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. The silence between us wasn't empty anymore. It was full of things we finally understood. The grass had already started to reclaim the edges of the walkway by the time Patrick pulled up to the old house. Emily's lease had been broken, furniture cleared, the place scrubbed back to a version of itself that never truly existed. The windows stared out blankly, closed but not empty. There was nothing left in that house worth mourning. Only boxes that hadn't mattered before and now suddenly did. Childhood keepsakes, a stack of old journals she hadn't dared touch until recently, and the last of the photographs that hadn't been torn or hidden away. He parked at the curb, not the driveway, and for a moment just sat with the engine off, listening. The house was quiet. For once, that quiet didn't feel ominous. It felt like the page had finally turned. Janine was in her front yard again, same wide-brimmed hat, same secateurs, trimming back the last blooms of the season. When she saw him, she hesitated, then straightened, wiping her hands on her gardening apron. "Mr. Landon," she said softly, cautious, like someone approaching a grave. He stepped out, nodded once, and crossed toward the porch. "I wasn't trying to be dramatic that day," she added. I heard her, too many times, and that scream, I couldn't ignore it anymore." Patrick paused at the top of the porch steps. He turned, not angry, not even bitter, just anchored. "I'm not sorry I found out that way," he said. She blinked, surprised. "You're not?" He looked back at the door, the one Emily had locked behind her so many times. hoping it would hold longer than it ever did. No, I'm just glad someone said something. Janine didn't speak after that. She nodded once, turned back to her roses. Inside, the air had gone stale. Empty houses always breathe differently, less like a home, more like a memory, holding its breath. Patrick moved through the space with quiet efficiency, gathered the boxes, checked the cabinets twice, found one final scarf in the linen closet, neatly folded, one Emily used to wear on rainy mornings in college. He didn't linger, he didn't sit, but as he closed the front door behind him, he paused one last time on the porch and looked out over the cul-de-sac. So many houses, so many windows, all those neighbors, all that silence, and just one voice that had cut through it. As he stepped off the porch, he caught Janine's eye once more. She gave him the smallest nod, and he understood. Sometimes the person who changes everything isn't the one in the fight. It's the one who finally yells loud enough that the quiet can't swallow it anymore.